Hello, everyone. My name's Terry, and I am an alcoholic. Stephen, again, thank you for the opportunity to be of service this evening for me. And, just always appreciate the opportunity to do anything I can for AA because I'll never be able to balance the scales of what it's given to me. Um, just starting, my home group is the Bill W meeting. It's a virtual meeting Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on the East Coast. My sponsor is George M. His sponsor is Sam A. And my sobriety date is November 25th, 1989. Uh, let's see, what it was like. My first real drink, I had little nips and sips as people do when you're kids. But the first time I really experienced alcohol, I was 13. I was at the friend's house that has low parental supervision and a fully stocked bar. And this guy, we're out back. There was a group of us guys there. They had a bottle of Southern Comfort, and it was being passed around the circle. And I took that big old pull off of that bottle, and I had that pow. I'll always remember it going down and hitting my belly, and that pow, and it was like electricity was shot out to my fingers and toes. And I passed it along there, and then I started to get the effect. There was that initial pow and that effect. And to that point, the way I described it, to that point in my life, life kind of felt like a sandpaper suit. I was just not comfortable. I didn't feel like I really had a good sense of what everybody else seemed to know. And this is a common theme. And I was just trying to fit in. I didn't want to be the best. I didn't want to be the worst. I just kind of wanted to be in the middle. And some people describe that's the hole. I remember a guy saying, it was a hole in his soul. He was born with a hole in his soul. I later came to find out that's the God hole. I had a God hole. And in that moment, that drink gave me a sense of peace and ease. I hadn't experienced it before. It temporarily filled that God hole, and I felt okay. I felt a way that I hadn't felt before. Now, what I later came to find out was, those guys in that circle passing that bottle around, they weren't having the experience I was having. I have an allergy that was triggered. I had the more from that night because I immediately started counting down how many more people it was until that bottle got back to me and I could have that second pull. And, that's the more side of it. I also have the mental obsession, which was, I want to do this again. If that first one was that good, what is the second one going to feel like? And what's the next one going to feel like? That evening, I blacked out. I was a blackout drinker from the get-go. I woke up the next morning. I got all the back slaps, and all the guys were like, "You were out of your mind. You're crazy, man. You were fantastic." And the reality was, I would have at the time, in early sobriety, also told you that it was one of those where, it kind of gave me this peace and ease, and I felt comfortable, and I could talk to girls or dance or whatever. And the truth was, I like the effect of alcohol from the get-go. I didn't get to the point where, dancing and talking to girls by the end was long gone and off the table. And you know what? I still drank because I was pursuing the effect. That's what I was in love with. Like I said, I was a blackout drinker from the get-go. And when you're a 13-year-old and you're a blackout drinker, you're going for the effect. No kid comes home from the 8th grade and wants to have a couple cocktails to take the edge off of the day. I wanted to go right up. There's, in the book, it talks about, the person who's more or less insanely drunk. That was me. That's where I wanted to be. For the folks who remember on the, when we used to have the big TVs with the tube TVs and you turn it off and the edges would start to come in and then it would go pow and it would have that little dot. I wanted to drink to that point where I could see the edges coming in because I knew it was happening. that blackout was happening. I'd finally made it there. And from that day forward, I pursued alcohol. Alcohol became my higher power. I wasn't a daily drinker at 13 years old, but it influenced every decision I made. It influenced who I hung around with, what I did, where I lived. All my decisions came through the lens of, when can I get to that next point where I can drink the way that I want to drink? The examples are, I'm 15 years old. I get my first fake ID out of the back of the Rolling Stone. My friends are going to a video arcade, to do what 15-year-olds do. I'm asking the guy who's driving to drop me off at the bar by the airport so I can try out this new fake ID and see how well it works. I was a geographic guy. I'd move when things got hot, but I'd also move if it was a better opportunity to drink. I moved from New England to Montreal just because somebody told me that the bars were open till 4 a.m. and that you didn't have to drive, you could walk everywhere. And I said, that sounds fantastic. They probably told me other great things about the city, but that I didn't need to hear anything beyond that. Type of jobs I took. I loved the second shift jobs, because I could, still catch some drinking time when I got off work. There were bars that were open. I could sleep in the morning and, start work about 4 p.m. And, usually those kinds of jobs, there's low supervision, so I could drink a little on the job if I needed to get a head start before I got off shift and, met folks out at a bar. And like I said, it wasn't that I was a daily drinker from the get-go, but alcohol became my higher power, and it drove the decisions that I made in every part of my life. The next 10 years were the progression for me. I did a lot of fun drinking, had fun times, really didn't have any consequences. Then you have, some of the good times, and then you're starting to get a bit of the consequences. And ultimately, the drinking wasn't working and I was getting all the consequences. But I couldn't put that together. You see, when I ran into problems wherever I was, I would change everything but the drinking. I'd change girlfriends, I'd change, like I said, geographic locations. I'd change drinking circles. I went from, drinking with groups of friends to going to those really dedicated drinking bars, like the ones that nobody has a car and everybody's sitting outside waiting for it to open up in the morning. We're showing up on 10 speeds or walking there and everybody's hanging out until the bar opens. And eventually, even stepping away from that and drinking alone, because the problems that I had in my life weren't alcohol. I could always figure out a plan around that. It was everything else around me. I either wasn't getting what I needed, or people weren't acting right or not doing what I needed them to do. Or sometimes it was just, you wouldn't leave me alone. If you just leave me alone and let me do my thing, everything would be okay. My geographics took me from Rhode Island, where I grew up, to Hartford, Connecticut, and that lasted a couple of years, and then Montreal, and that lasted a couple of years. And then I came down to Atlanta. Atlanta was my last geographic, and it was one of those fresh start things. I'm going to come down. It's cold and snowy up in Canada. I see picture people in Atlanta. They're outside in the sunshine in shorts, and that's the fresh start I need. I came to Atlanta just to kind of visit. And, when they say wherever you go, you bring yourself with you. I show up, it's going to be a fresh start. And within 72 hours, I remember being at a restaurant. They're refusing to let me leave because I'm so intoxicated. It's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I sneak out a back door. I'm driving around in my rental car, and, I end up, picking up a random person in, the middle of the night, and we're driving around throwing beer bottles at, crack dealers in downtown Atlanta. And that's that progression of, the last place I left, those are the kinds of things I was doing. And, within 72 hours of showing up a new city, the real me showed up at the new city. So what happened? It's now 1989. I'm going to school down here. I got a part-time job that pays for my room and board while I'm down here, and help get me through school. Physically, I've seen pictures of myself. I'm shiny. I'm kind of swollen, bloated to the point where my skin has a sheen to it. I'm also getting a little tinge of a yellow, like old linoleum, because my liver's starting to kind of struggle with the consumption. I am a daily drinker at this point. Mentally, I'm shot out. My days and nights are inverted. I don't sleep. I more or less pass out on the couch and, some point in the overnight and wake up some point during the day. I do have a belief in a power greater than myself, but my prayers are really are either, why are you doing this to me? Or is that all you got? Depending on my mood. My drinking at this point, it's kind of the shampoo effect. I might have a couple of beers and a shot and black out. I might be up all night drinking anything I can get my hands on and not even getting close to that place that I wanted to be. So what really brought me to my knees at that point, like I said, I was working, and this is the 1980s. This is before computers and cell phones and YouTube and all that. My boss called me into his office, and there had been a work-related event. It was a dinner, and he slid some pictures across the desk to me, and there's everybody there, and there's me just hanging off the person at the end, very visibly intoxicated. The most important thing to say is they weren't serving alcohol at this event. So I showed up in that condition. And he says to me, what's going on? What's happening? And rather than giving one of my very slick kind of backpedaling excuses, I looked at him and said, I don't know. And, he said, well, you're going to have to figure it out. And, this was where, my life is now crumbling before me. I've given up driving at this point too, just because, if you've been to Atlanta, Georgia, it's a place you have to drive everywhere. And I just knew that it was a matter of time before I got popped for a DUI. But I mapped out my locations that I could walk to buy alcohol and bring it home. All right, so I had the conversation with the guy who's my boss. He's telling me to, figure things out. And they published this university newspaper where I was going, and I grabbed the copy, or I had it where I'm in my apartment where I was. And this is where I get on my soapbox about the steps here. There was a letter that they had republished, was under the letters to the editor. I really can't figure out why they published it, but this letter saved my life. And essentially, the letter was a 9-step amends letter. And it was from a guy who had attended the school in, the 50s or 60s. And he was making financial amends to his fraternity, the university, for damage he had done. And the letter went beyond that. It went beyond here's, some money for the damage I did. And the person in the letter went on to tell their story. And, they grew up in New England like I did. And, they moved down south to get education. And then they moved back north and, married. And woven through the story was the progression of this person's drinking. And I was able to follow that and go, well, I grew up there. Yeah, I'm in school here. My plan is to move back up north and, find a gal and settle down and get a good professional, respectable job. And this person, brought me to my present point and then told me the rest of the story. And it was about the progression of his illness and how it culminated for him of, going to a football game in Massachusetts and blacking out and waking up behind a gas station store in his car. The engine's running. He's in park, but the engine's running. And he had left home on Sunday, and it's Tuesday now. And I said, that's me right now. And this is where I'm headed. And he didn't, follow the traditions, did not talk about, AA specifically, but shared in a general way. what his life was like, what happened, and that, he had, he, at that point, things changed for him and he got in part of recovery. And this was part of what he had to do to stay sober. Um, if that person doesn't do that 9-step amends, I'm not here now. I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. Nobody in my family was an alcoholic. In my immediate family that I was aware of, I just didn't know anything about this organization. And if that guy was like me, this is where the steps and good sponsorship really have benefit, because he probably just wrote a check and said, I'm going to send this off. The sponsor said, well, hang on a second. I think you ought to do a little more. And he probably put a Post-it note on it and said, for damage done while I was drunk, at the school. And the sponsor said, no, try again. And ultimately, he crafted a letter that was a true amends. And this, if he doesn't do that, I'm not here tonight, because that amends letter 12-step me. And I don't know who this guy is, never met him, don't know anything about him. I just know that him working the program saved my life. Okay, so off the soapbox, back kind of on the humorous side. Had a little byline under there. If you think you have a problem with alcohol, call Alcoholics Anonymous. So I dial up the number in Atlanta, and to this day, I swear that the guy who answered it was Cooter from the Dukes of Hazzard, because I call and the phone rings and the guy's like, "How you doing?" And I said, I'm not doing too good. I'm calling you guys, like I'm not on a winning streak. And we talked a bit, and he said, you want me to send some people out for you? And I was like, yeah, no, don't send the AA ambulance. I'm like thinking they're going to have a car with lights on it or something, take me away. It's like, yeah, no AA ambulance. Like, don't need that. And we talked, and he said, hey, look, there's this meeting close by to where you are. And do you think you can not drink, until you get there? And I'm like, yeah, I guess, like, I don't know. And then he said, hey, man. I said, yeah. He said, AA's going to screw up your drinking. And, I kind of chuckled and was like, yeah, whatever. And I didn't understand what that meant, because then he went on to say, he said, it's going to screw up your drinking because you'll never be able to say nobody cares. And I was like, yeah, okay. And hung up the phone. And obviously, having been here a little bit, I understand what he's talking about. There's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA. The people in here would do anything for any alcoholic who's in their cups and wants recovery. And, it's as much what and, trying to combine the two as it is knowing that the solution's here and there's anybody at any time, is ready to be of service and extend the hand of AA. So I white knuckle it until I can get to that first meeting. I don't remember much about that first meeting. I remember that I, went in there. It was late November. I'm sweating profusely, and in the middle of winter in Atlanta, it was cold enough. I got 10 radios, the volume turned all the way up to 10 different radio stations in my head. There's a very nice woman greets me at the door and asks me my name. And I look at her and say, why? And she said, well, it looks like this might be your first time here, and I just want to prepare you. They might ask. And I said, okay. And, I don't recall specifically what was said. What I remember was what it felt like. People were sharing stories and things that were happening with them that were the things that were happening to me, that were the things of how I felt about it, where I was living presently, but they were talking about it in the past and sharing how things changed. And, that was the message that I got was, that there was another side to this, and they were laughing about it. And I didn't get indignant, like, I can't believe you laugh at what's going on with me. I was like, oh, like, these people are at the point where they're beyond this and they think that this is funny. I want to be there. I want to be on the other side. I don't want to live the way that I'm living now. And these people seem to have moved on of that. And, that's the fellowship. That was the hook for me, was the fellowship of AA. My first year, They say don't drink and go to meetings. I kind of did the don't work and go to meetings. I hit the midday meetings down here in Atlanta. But let's see. I was okay if I was in that kind of glow of a meeting. If I was in the 15 minutes before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting, definitely in the meeting and the meeting after the meeting, or just driving home from a meeting, I felt okay. But if I was outside of, an hour and a half of a meeting, I was not doing okay. If I was having coffee with another alcoholic, I was doing okay. But if I was, up in the middle of the night, I was not doing okay. Um, you know, let's see. Alcohol was what kept me going. That was what kept me alive. It's almost like if you take a car engine and you drain the oil out of it and you drive it around on the highway, eventually it's going to throw a rod. And so, I'm not drinking and I'm going to meetings. And like I said, I'm feeling good in the meetings, but those other hours during the day, it's not good. I'm left alone with me. You've taken away my best friend. You're taking away the thing that got me through my days. And I have this incredible vacuum. That God hole is not only is it back, but it's huge and it's in this black hole to me. The book talks about the real alcoholic. I'm the real alcoholic. I can't get by on the meetings and fellowship. I need a solution. I need to fill that God hole because I'm going to put something in there. And so, I need the steps and I need a program. So I'm 9 months in. I'm dying on the inside, and of course, I'm not telling anybody. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. And I don't want to drink, but I'm starting to consider some other options, some ones that are very final. And, again, God intervened at that point in my life because I was at, one of my little meetings that I went to, and a guy walked in and he had a year. The rest of us had about 90 days at this meeting. This guy had a year. And, he came up, he said, "How you doing?" And I actually, instead of saying fine, I said, "I'm not doing too good." And he connected me with a guy who became my sponsor. And the funny side story there is he gave me the guy's phone number. I called and left a message on his answering machine, and didn't hear back from him and gave it the old, that's how AA works. People really don't care, that whole thing. Well, eventually I saw the guy and said, "He never called me back." And he said, "Yeah, I've been looking for you. You didn't leave your phone number on his machine." So I was still pretty shot out at that point, but I connected with this guy. Last $5, I bought this very big book and I started doing the work. And I started to get the relief that comes with the work. I believe that, when you start drinking, you stop growing when you're an alcoholic, and I was 13 years old. And when I stopped drinking, I've got the skill set and the life skills of a 13-year-old. Everybody else was learning how to navigate life, and I was just pouring alcohol over it. So I start to get, if I've got a hammer, when I get sober, and if it's not a hammer problem, well, or solution, I'm going to make it one. It doesn't matter if it's a screw or a hinge or anything. I'm going to treat it like a nail. I start doing the steps. I'm starting to add tools to my toolbox. I'm starting to add a saw and a screwdriver and things like that. And I'm starting to get the relief that comes from doing the work. I had a great sponsor one time. He said, we come to the program with a backpack full of bricks. And, when we get up to 4 and 5, we start sorting through that backpack to figure out which bricks are ours and which aren't. And it lightens the load. And then I go to 6 and 7, and those bricks that are mine, I'm starting to figure those out, and those character defects. And then 8 and 9, I get to unload some more of that bricks. And, I still got some bricks in there because I'm far from perfect, but it's a lot less than what I came in with. And, my story's not uncommon. Years 2 through 10, life gets good. Life starts to get big. I get a job, a real job. I get married. I get a car that, has all the parts that work on it, but then life got really big and A started to get small. I moved away from where my regular meetings are, and it was kind of that of, well, I don't really like the meetings. in this area. And, then, you kind of say, well, I'll try and get to those other meetings, but I'm not going to go to the ones here because I don't like how they share or run things, all that kind of ego, self-serving stuff. During this time, I decided to switch sponsors. I decided to sponsor myself. I thought it was a good idea. I'd heard this guy share. I liked what he had to say. When I told him about my problems, he was always on my side. Eventually, I found out that he was out of his mind, and he was terrible, gave terrible advice, and I had to let him go. And I didn't drink, but I got back into the bedevilments. Page 52, the big book talks about the bedevilments, which is untreated alcoholism. I started sliding back to untreated alcoholism. You start having trouble with personal relationships. I can't control my emotional nature. I'm starting to have misery and depression. And I'm not only am I in misery and depression, I'm showing you how miserable I am. I'm having a feeling of, the fear is returned about things, financial security and all those things. And I'm lucky. God grabbed me again. I was driving down the highway one afternoon, and this guy rolls up next to me honking his horn, and I'm figuring this is somebody who's looking for a fight. And I look over at the car next to me, and it's a guy I got sober with, and he's giving me the Forrest Gump wave from the car. And I realize he's going to this meeting that we used to go to at 5:45. So I follow him over there, and we start talking. And I start asking about the people we got sober with, and he's telling me, no, that person, no, not around. That, no, not that person. And we go into the meeting, and there's a woman there who we got sober with, who's drunk in the meeting, because she can't put 2 days together. And by the way, I'm okay with drunks in the meeting. It's a place that they should be. And I did the old, got it, God, thank you, thank you for this. And I got back into the program and got back and make it my primary purpose. And I, got a home group, I got a sponsor, I got into service. I started doing some work, did another inventory, those sorts of things, went around, made some amends. So, years 10 through 20, 11 through 20, and I got pretty good AA at this point. I moved with the blessing of my sponsor from Atlanta. I moved to New York City. It was a work-related move. I have service commitments. I got sponsees. I'm accountable to people. I'm going to meetings. And I kind of have that. I have that, what I call kind of the balanced scorecard there. When it comes to AA, I'm probably a 9 out of 10 AA. Home life, I'm probably about a 7.5 to 8 out of 10. How I'm performing, how I'm doing at home. My wife's in the program, so I can't steer too far off course. Work, I'm probably about a 5 out of 10. AA doesn't always lead there. Driving, I'm maybe a 4 out of 10. Not doing so well driving. And, but I got pretty good AA. People know who I am. Like I said, I'm sponsoring guys. I've got a home group. I've got service commitments. And I ended up as a roundup up north. And there was a speaker there, a guy named Peter M. Out of New Jersey. I think he lives in Boca Raton, Florida now. And this guy had great AA. This guy had unbelievable AA. AA was the dominant thread in his life. It was his life, and everything else emanated from that. He didn't bring AA and drop it in his home life or drop it in his job. He had AA, and his life flowed out from that. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't sit there and say like, wow, this guy has what I want. What happened was I sat there and I got really disturbed. Because he knocked over, that pretty good AA wasn't good AA at all. It wasn't good AA at all. I was, I was active in my mind in AA, and I was showing up. But AA and my life were separate things. And that's why I kind of had that, well, it was good here and maybe don't bring it so much here. And my wife actually knew him. So I went and talked to him afterwards, and he connected me with a guy named Jimmy A in Freehold, New Jersey. And, you know, I started working with Jimmy. And, yeah, I worked with him. We met once a week for 1 hour, went line by line every week through the book. And I blew up my sobriety. Basically that's what I did. I ripped it all down. I dug up the foundation and I started over. And I wrote in the front of my book the set aside prayer. We set aside everything I think I know, for a new experience. And I got that, and the book came alive. I've learned about the history of AA. I found out there's over 225 promises in the book. I learned about the warnings and the directions. This is a textbook. It is what they're trying to do is convey information from the mind of the author to the mind of the reader. The way I explain it to guys is, it's like when you get one of those box cakes, the Duncan Hines, and it's got the beautiful picture of the cake on the front. What's on the back are the steps to get that. And it's like the book, it clearly sets out what to do and what not to do. And if you follow the steps, you're going to get the promises. Now, I don't know how the promises are going to manifest, but I can tell you that if you do the work, you follow the steps, and you properly bring the ingredients and do those things, you're going to get the cake on the front of the box. And alcoholics, me included, I'm prone to cut corners. I'm thinking, well, I don't have eggs, but I got mayonnaise, and they make eggs, mayonnaise made out of eggs, so I'm just going to use mayonnaise. Or I don't have 25 to 28 minutes at 350. I'm going to turn it up to 500. And then I get a crappy cake, and I'm like, well, geez, this cake's no good. And the reality is I didn't follow the directions that were on the box. And that's sometimes people's experience with AA. It's like, AA doesn't work. Well, did you follow the directions as they were set out there? The promises, use the cake analogy, you follow the steps and you get the cake. How the promises manifest themselves in your life, that's the frosting and the sprinkles. You want cream cheese frosting, you want chocolate frosting, you want sprinkles, you want candles. There are people, my experience is, the promises have manifested themselves in the way that a lot of people want them. They get into good, solid relationships. They get their family back. They're able to hold down a job and be a productive member, contributor on that job. There are other people who the promises have manifested themselves in different ways. For some people, it's the peace of mind. I just want the peace of mind. I don't want to be under constant attack from my thoughts. I want to be able to put my head on my pillow and close my eyes and simply go to sleep. So, you'll get the promises if you follow the steps. The beautiful thing is they're going to manifest themselves. They're going to be different in the way they're delivered to everybody else. And, it's an amazing thing to be able to bear witness to that, to carry that message and see people, move closer to God and experience a new life. And that is one of my great joys at this point, I will tell you, is sitting across the table from another guy and having him start where I started, which was, the agnostic, the without knowledge, which was, hey, it's not that I believe or don't believe in God. I just don't think that, he's working for me and he has an interest in me, and being able to give them a little hook and help them through the work. And, someone will say, well, I don't believe, but you're out of your mind about this stuff. So I believe that you believe, and that's enough to carry them through. And then they start to have a little bit of experience with the steps, and they start to see those little things happening in their life, and, the shift. And then some point, you see the light go on in their eyes, and they really get it, and they're willing to double down on the work. And look, that's not always the case. I also point out to my guys that there'll be the Judas step. There'll be the thing that you read ahead and see, and you go, I'm not doing that. And that's usually the thing you need to do the most. And I've had guys, sometimes they fall off. Usually it's some fall off at 4 and 5. I have some guys fall off at 8 and 9. And I'm not talking about going out and drinking. What I'm saying is, guys will go and things will improve some. A lot of times I have guys who come, they might have double-digit sobriety, but they're really not living a life they feel that they're just not in that place of really being free, and having that joy in living, and they want to do the work, and they get some relief and they kind of back off on going all the way through the work, and then they start to kind of taper and they go back to that level where they're around AA, but they're not really living the life that they could have. Sharing some of the things and my experiences with the steps, that I've learned generally, a few things here. The first is, the first 3 steps, I took them before I came in AA. When I took that first drink, in hindsight, I was absolutely powerless over alcohol. My life was absolutely unmanageable, and alcohol gave me the feeling that I could manage it. It was absolutely a power greater than myself, that restored to me what I felt was sanity at the time. It changed how I felt to something I liked. It did something for me that I couldn't do for myself, and I willingly turned my will in my life, my thoughts and actions over to alcohol. At that point, my big challenge when I came in was not really, understanding steps 1, 2, 3. It was taking out alcohol and putting in God. And then you get into, 4 and 5, that talked about the backpack full of bricks, what's mine, what's not yours. There was a lot of stuff in my 5th step that simply weren't my bricks. I was just carrying them around, a lot of stuff from when I was a little kid that had nothing to do with alcohol, but I had hung on to that stuff, and just simply being free of it was incredible relief. 6 and 7, I always describe those as the arch, the keystones in the arch. I'm doing all this work that leads up to those, because at the end of the day, those are the things that are really blocking me from God and from other people, my character defects. And on the other side, my character defects, will always be with me. Some of them have been shed and some new ones have popped up, and that's okay, because if I didn't have those character defects on the other side, I wouldn't need God anymore. My character defects bring me back to God. 8 and 9, I talk about the fondness for this, because it was what brought me into the program, the 9th step, and getting early on, making some really bad amends and having to re-add those people back to the list, because I did it without consulting my sponsor or before I was at that step, and getting good direction, because those steps, 8, 9, making amends, that's the byproduct for me is, I get freedom from that, but the intent of that is to free the other person. And in many cases, it's to restore their dignity, to give back to the universe, because I was a taker before that. And this is my way to put back in the inner universe what I've taken out. 10 and 11, these are the growth steps, not maintenance steps. These are definitely the growth steps. I listened to Joe and Charlie walk through step 10, and it's a microcosm of all the steps have proceeded. Everything from 4 through 9's in there. Immediately stop. I take an inventory of what happened. I talk to a person in the program or my sponsor about what happened. If there's an amend to make, I make it in real time there. Then I turn my thoughts to what I can do for someone else. And if I'm doing a 10th step, if I'm continually kind of making that touchstone, because in the 10th step, it doesn't say, if these things occur, it says when they occur. So it's guaranteed that it's going to happen. I'm staying plugged in. If I'm doing 4 through 9 on an almost daily basis, I'm staying plugged in. 11, prayer and meditation, really important. I explained to my guys about, I used to have an old analogy about, Mr. Coffee and setting your coffee up the night before. The reason that it's the night before and not the morning of, and they have that flipped, is if you think like with your cell phone, you plug your cell phone in at the end of the day. Why? Because you want it refreshed in the morning. I mean, how many people have, you get up in the morning, you look at your phone and you realize the plug had fallen out of the wall. and you're at 15%. Your mind is already, I can't believe it. It didn't charge. Oh, am I gonna, oh, well, I guess I can charge it now while I'm getting ready, and maybe I'll charge it in the car. And my mind's already spinning. If I plug that phone in before I go to bed, if I do that connection, that inventory that step 11 talks about before I go to bed, when I get up in the morning, that's fully charged. My mind is not clouded with the things that happened the day before. I'm waking up to a fully charged phone, and I am not thinking about, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm at 8%. I got a fully charged phone. I'm now focused on my day. 12, 12's great because to me, it really sets out, and this has been incredibly helpful. How I engage the person who's new to AA, how I engage the wet drunk, what do I say on the first visit? What don't I say on the first visit? What do I do on the second visit? When do I bring the book in? It gives me those clear instructions because, I'm there to help them. I'm there to deliver the message of hope. And I've been the guy who's gone out without really understanding how that works. And remember sitting across from a guy and, blah, 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 and my story, and I'm telling him all this stuff and looking up from my coffee and seeing that his eyes were as big as saucers because I had just kind of done this whole monologue there and it told them a lot about me, but very little about the program. Step 12 is make sure that I don't do that. Do I have great sobriety now? No, I don't have that every day, but I know what I need to do. And I know what I need to do to achieve it. At this point in my sobriety, it's not harder to stay sober, but it takes more work. And I know we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna leave you with this little parable that I heard one time. Don't know where it is, but I really do appreciate it. Dad comes home from work. He's had a long day. He's got a little 5-year-old boy. The boy comes up, love to see dad. He's like, Dad, let's play. Let's do this. Dad, he just wants a little time to decompress. And he says, look, I just want to read the paper for 5 minutes. And 5-year-olds don't understand 5 minutes. Kids coming back, Dad, let's play. And the dad, sees on the back page of the newspaper, there's a map, there's a picture of the globe, map of the world on the back of this. It's some telecom company. And so he tears off the back of the newspaper and he rips it up into little pieces. And he tells the kid, look, when you tape this back together, I'll play with you. And then he goes, the kid takes all the pieces and runs off and gets the tape. And he figures I got at least 30 minutes, if he even finishes it. Kid comes back 5 minutes later and the dad is dumbfounded and says, I can't believe you did this. And not only did you do it, it's right. He's like, how did you do it, son? And the kid shows him the opposite side of the page. And it's a man in a suit. It's an ad for like Brooks Brothers or something. And it's a man in a suit. And the kid looks at him and says, when I put the man back together, the world fell in place. And that has always stuck with me. So thanks for the service. God bless. Have a great night, everybody.